I'm Joel Silverman with my guest today, Shilpi Roy.
Hello.
She is a writer, a director, the creator and EP of a show called Brown Girls, which you almost certainly haven't been able to see, but should have. And she's got a bit of a story to tell. So, Shilpi, thanks so much for coming on.
Thanks for having me, Joel.
It's exciting. I'm pleased to say that I have known Shilpi since before she was a huge deal. Uh, and so this is fun to watch and just get to bask in her accomplishment.
Well,
Uh,
I'm glad somebody is basking in it because
yeah,
I just spend most of my time in my pajamas, quite frankly.
I mean, I think for a lot of people, that's the definition of success.
That's true. I definitely aspired to that and I have reached it. So in that case, I am, I guess, a big deal.
Well, then I guess I should say thank you as well for dressing up.
Oh, don't worry, just the top half.
I also feel like I should point out to viewers what you told me right before we went live, which is that background is something that you actually took yourself, filmed
Yes,
yourself.
yeah. It's the Queen's Bath in Kauai, which is we went in the winter and it's like really like deathly forceful waves crashing on those rocks behind me.
Hmm.
But in slow motion, it's quite calming and soothing. In real time, it's like, oh my God, I'm gonna die. So we didn't spend a lot of time there, but did get this video.
And in a certain way, that feels like a pretty good allegory for Hollywood. When you're looking right at it, it's like I'm gonna die. But then when you take a step back, it's kind of nice.
That's true. That's very clever of you, Joel.
I do my best. Uh, so I always like to start by asking what somebody is working on now, what they're up to, give us an endpoint, and then like every pilot on TV these days, we'll flash back to the beginning and find out how we got here.
Yes, yes, it's a common theme. So I am currently writing a pilot for the Disney Channel that I pitched them. So I pitched them a pilot, I pitched them a show. They bought the pilot, so I've been developing it with them, and I'm now literally 2 days ago I was sent off to script. So now I'm
Oh,
literally writing it.
wow. Well, congratulations, and that sounds like you're going to be pretty occupied then for the duration of the quarantine, which is good, and getting paid for it.
Yeah, yeah. It feels good to get paid during quarantine.
Yeah, I myself am getting paid during quarantine, and it's a weird feeling to make money without ever leaving the house. Again, that's kind of the dream, just not under these circumstances.
Right, right. Well, I'm glad everybody is kind of realizing that it is the dream. I think maybe once more people work from home and hopefully like it, they can kind of continue it in some way.
Yeah, and then we can have pajama studios.
Yes.
Cool. So you're a working writer now.
Hmm.
You are selling pilots. You were just staff on a show. Uh, what show were you on recently?
It's called Team Kaylee. It's on Netflix. It was on in the kids and family vertical on Netflix. And
Okay.
actually, it's what kind of led to this Disney Channel idea because the idea for the show originally was like adult comedy on like any broadcast network, and I was pitching it around that way, and just like it like I could tell it wasn't going to land anywhere. But I was on this Netflix show, which was essentially, for kids and family, and it occurred to me that I could turn my show into a kids and family show. Especially because I was staffed on the show. So I kind of saw how it works, how like the whole kids genre works. So I redeveloped my original idea into kind of a kid-friendly show. And that's what I ended up pitching to Disney Channel and selling. So
Interesting.
yeah.
So what shifted, if you're able to say, what's the premise of it and how did it shift when it went from an adult show to a kids show?
Sure, yeah. I mean, what shifted was the age of the main characters, right? So the main characters were adults. And the show is about it's about a blended family of Indians like me, where my parents are from India, and Cherokee Indians, who are
Hmm.
Native Americans, right? And they live in a small town in North Carolina where they're one of the only essential like brown families in, the area. And so in the original idea, they were adults and they had kind of left home, but they had come back, right? And so they're kind of dealing with the whole small town thing and being brown and kind of dealing with their old demons in this town. But in developing the idea as adults, I wanted to put in flashbacks to when they were kids and the family had just come together. And them trying to figure out, like, what does it all mean? I'm Indian, you're Indian, but we're not both Indian. Like, it's just like a fun thing to play with. And I realized that my favorite part of the show was the flashbacks. And so I was like, well, why don't I just make the kid version of the show, like when the family did actually get together and these two girls suddenly became stepsisters. And it's about two girls who are the same age. And so dealing with it from, when it happened as opposed to like when they were adults. So in the beginning, it was like, oh, that'll be so easy. It's just, just age it down. It's not that easy. It's never that easy to redevelop anything. So
Right.
It still took a lot of hard work. And it was funny because a lot of the relationships and kind of things that I'd worked out for the adult version didn't apply anymore. Right. So, and stuff that I was like, oh, well, that doesn't matter. Like, I didn't have their childhoods crystal clear. But all of a sudden, some of the stuff that I glossed over in their childhood, now I had to like really, really clarify because that's what the show is about. So it was
So
still a lot.
instead of visiting the flashback or the origin time, we're living there, and so we got to get all the details.
Yeah. So it still took quite a bit of effort, but at the end of the day, it was worth it because I was able to sell it. So.
And do we still see the future in this version? Like,
no, there is no future. So now it's just because it's a Disney Channel show.
right.
Target audience is like 8 to 11-year-old. So it's going to stay in, now it's the present, although technically it was the past of the other version. Yeah.
And so it's set in the present day.
Yes.
In 2020.
Mm-hmm.
Or I guess probably 2019 or 2021 because your characters aren't all going to be in quarantine.
I mean, I haven't even thought about pre-corona, post-corona. Like I don't even know if that's something I have to address now.
It's never too early.
Oh my God. You just brought that up. Oh my God. I haven't even thought about like, well, I'll wait for Disney to bring that up.
Cool. I really miss my calling as a pain in the ass exec. Just it's great, but could we just change a few things?
Yeah.
Well, so that's awesome. And it's also, as I'm sure you probably experienced from the Netflix show, there's something really fun and special I've seen from friends who work on kids shows, because even if friends who are adults and don't have kids might not know it, you meet the kid that knows it and they go, oh, they work on such a, and these kids like lose it. I told my cousin's kids that I knew someone who worked on some show, and I'm embarrassed to say off the top of my head, I don't remember the name of it. And it was like, what? That is the craziest thing I've ever heard. I don't think they could even fully conceptualize what it meant, but that I knew someone associated.
Right.
So really what I'm saying is that if your show goes, I'm going to try and use your cachet to be awesome with the 8 to 11-year-olds in my life.
I mean, I'm fine with that. You have full license to do that, whatever you want with it.
Cool. Thank you. I have no children of my own, but I pride myself on being the cool uncle.
Yeah.
So, all right. So this is where you are now.
Mm-hmm.
Let's flash back. Where would you say that your story starts?
My story starts where this started, on the internet, I would say.
Okay. What does that mean?
It means I made a web series. So I went to film school. I went to USC. I guess if you want to backtrack a little further, I'm from North Carolina and grew up in a fairly traditional Indian household where film and TV was in no way considered a career. So I also never considered it as a career myself, even though I love film and television always. Until I was in college, and I was an economics and psychology major. And I realized that I hated all of my career prospects. I was like not excited about my life at all. And I was trying to figure out what to do. And in my senior year, I had enough room in my schedule to do a minor. And so I did a film studies minor. And in the first 2 days of classes, I realized that it was way more fun than anything I had done in the last 3 years in college. And I decided to go into film, not really knowing anything about it, right? So I in that minor, there are like a couple of production classes. But, so I learned like how to use a camera, I guess. And like, just, stories require beginning, middle, and end, like stuff like that. But it was so much fun that I came to LA, and I worked for a year. I was very lucky because within coming to LA in my first week, I actually got a job with Warren Littlefield.
Really?
Yeah.
How'd you pull that off?
Because one of the alumni at my college was actually working with him. And I had kind of, like you did the thing where I like reach out to contacts or whatever from my school. And I told him I was coming to LA, and he was like, oh, well, we're probably going to need a new assistant in our office when you get here. So let me know and we'll bring you in to interview. And he didn't to this day, I'm not sure if he told me who Warren Littlefield was, and I just didn't pay attention, or like he never really told me, and I didn't Google him. I guess that was not something I knew that you were supposed to do at that point. But I didn't Google him. So I went in and like, I was very nervous because it was kind of my first real job interview. But all we did was talk about TV shows. That was it. Like what I liked, what I didn't like, and why. And I was like, oh, I can do this, right? Like answering the phone, I'm not sure about, but this, I can talk about TV all day long. So I got hired, I went home, and that's when I found, like, my roommate was like, oh my God, what was he like? And I was like, do you know him? Like, why would you know him? And she's like, did you not Google him? And I was like, no. So then I Googled him, found out that he used to be the president of NBC and like all this stuff. And thank God I did not Google him, because I would have been so nervous if I had beforehand. But anyway, I worked for Warren for a year. I learned like a lot of things about the industry. I learned that I found development very boring and I did not want to be a producer. And so then I went to USC Film School for grad. I did an MFA. And then I say the internet because after I got out of USC, yes.
Well, I want to pause you before you go into what comes next, because we're speeding through some really interesting stuff here. So what did you end up doing working in Warren's office? What was your
I was a second
What didn't you like about development?
Well, okay, so it was a 5-person office. When I went there, it was on the Paramount lot. I was person number 5, and I was his second assistant. So it was him. He had a development exec, the 2 assistants, and then my friend who was my like college contact. I'm not even sure what his title was. He was like a talent scout or something. I don't know. But yeah, so I was second assistant, and I just did assistant stuff. But it was just really boring. Like nothing really happened. And I couldn't tell, like as an assistant, I couldn't see the producing that was happening. People would come in for meetings and writers would come in. And while I was there, I think we shot 2 pilots. And it was during the pilot shoots that all of a sudden everything became really fun, because I worked on them both. And I told Warren, had asked me like, what do you want to do? And I'm like, I don't know, but I've seen, like, I know what this is. I would love to work in production and like see what that is. And so he was like, sure. So I was a PA on both the pilots, and I had like, obviously like way more fun being on set than sitting in the office, doing a 9 to 5 or whatever. And so that's what led me to want to apply to film school and like learn production. But the irony is, like, now I'm, essentially a TV writer, and I finally understand what was happening in the office while I was there as an assistant. And like, now I understand what development is and how it works. And one of the other things I didn't really understand at all while I was there was just how TV writing works. It was very difficult for me to understand how you tell a story that it can go on indefinitely. I just like, I couldn't wrap my head around that. And that's what all TV is, right? You have to keep it open in some way. And so it wasn't until I made my web series on the internet that I finally understood how to tell an episodic story. And then,
so,
then of course, things were getting clearer.
Sorry, say that again.
And then again, it cleared up like what I had been doing or what Warren had been doing, and like has led me to where I am today.
And so, again, I'm. It's not that I don't want to talk about that web series. I very much do. But before we get to it, and for that matter to USC, I'm curious, what did you see? What was it that you realized, like, oh, so that's what development is? Like, for somebody who has never worked in development, for someone who doesn't know what it is, what was going on at that office that you weren't aware of?
Okay, so what I was aware of was the day-to-day assistant work, which is answering phones, keeping a call sheet, you know, ordering lunches, scheduling meetings, you know, like assistant work, which is not that exciting. I was like kind of invited into meetings, but not, I mean, the way I remember it is like, they weren't like actively pushing me into meetings. Like, you should sit in on these. So I didn't sit in. I feel like I probably could have. All I had to do was ask, but I was kind of too afraid. So I wasn't in a lot of meetings. But there would occasionally be like times where we would all sit around and kind of pitch ideas on something they were developing. And that I found extremely intimidating, because I was like, I don't know anything. Like, I'm sure all my ideas are crap. Like, why would I say anything? You know, but then like, the whole point is that we're pitching ideas or developing something. And I just couldn't, it's so different from an academic environment, which is like what I was used to, that I like, and I was really good at like academia. Like, I understand how school works and like getting the highest grade and studying and all that. And this was just such a different way of approaching problem solving, which is like, what if we did this? Right. You know?
Right. Let's blue sky this.
Yeah, exactly.
There's no right answer.
But also there clearly was a right answer, because some things, you know, would go over much better than other things.
Right.
And I couldn't distinguish like what the difference was. Like, how was one random idea any better than the other random idea? Like, I didn't figure it out. So I kind of stayed away from that stuff. I mean, I think while I was there, I was writing my own scripts, but I was writing like feature stuff. So I wasn't even trying to do anything TV related. And honestly, it being like my first real job, I was just like tired all the time. You know, like you drive there and then you're just sitting behind a desk for a very, very, you know, 8 hours a day or whatever. And then I remember in the beginning, like I would drive home and I would want to go to bed by like 8 p.m. It was just a lot of, it was just like hard kind of psychologically to deal with like the day job. It's one of the reasons I don't have one anymore. And then like you'd have really important people calling in. And I only know that they're important because someone told me they're important, but they're kind of like faceless people. So it was hard for me to really like connect the dots as to like everything that was going on while I was in the office. But now, you know, having seen much more and been in the industry, like now I understand how all those dots are connected. I just didn't understand back then.
That's cool. Well, and speaking of understanding, I'm curious, how did your folks understand and respond to you saying, I'm not going to do economics, psychology, whatever you have been studying, and now you're working in a production office in film, getting somebody coffee?
Yeah, so I was very clever about that, but only at the last second. You know, my parents had been badgering me like all of senior year, like, so are you going to business school or are you going to graduate school? Business school or grad? Those are my two choices. I had already told them freshman year I was not going to be pre-med. I'm not going to med school. So like they knew not to ask about that. And I would just be like, I'll apply to both, you know, like I just didn't know what to say. And then I'm like sitting down to do these applications and I'm like, I don't want to go to either. So this is kind of where I, you know, decided, all right, I'm going to go into film, but I didn't know how to tell them. And I didn't know how to tell them. I was like, I want to go to LA and try to be a filmmaker, even though I have very little training. I didn't know what to say. I didn't know what to say. And then I knew like I had to tell them something. Kind of had a deadline on this. was. I don't remember why, but I gave myself a deadline. I have to say something to them.
Sure.
So I didn't know what I was going to say, but I called them and I was like, I will figure it out on the phone. And then literally as I was talking to them, I figured out what to say. Because I was applying to one graduate program. It was the USC Peter Stark Producing Program. One of my professors at my university had told me to apply to that program. And so I called my parents and I said, I'm applying to this one program and it's like business school for film. And they went, oh, okay, that's cool. And that was it. And so that gave, and I told them, it's very hard to get in. They take like 12 people a year, right? So it's extremely selective. And if I don't get in, what my professor told me to do is go to LA, work for a year, and then reapply. And so that was the deal. That's what I was going to do. So they were actually, they had no idea, right? So they were like, okay, well, I guess if that's what your professor has told you to do, that's what you should do. So that's how I kind of bought myself that time, that year to work for Warren. And then when I realized I didn't really enjoy being, in TV development, and I would much rather learn like, production stuff, I reapplied to USC, but I applied to their production program. And I don't think I told my parents that. I just told them I'm reapplying to the program. And so then when I got into the production program, by that point, I had been in LA for like a year and a half or something, whatever it was. Like I had been earning money. I had a salary and benefits with Warren. So like I was pretty independent financially at that point. And so when I told him I got into USC and I was like, and by the way, it's a production program. It's not that other stupid business school for film. That wasn't even a thing. I'm going to be a filmmaker. And they're like, wait, what? Like, where did that come from? And I'm like, it's too late. You can't do anything about it now. This is just what's happening. And so they kind of just, had to be okay with it by that point.
That reminds me, to me, it's like when I was studying abroad and during spring break in New Zealand, I was studying in Australia. I decided that I was going to go jump out of an airplane, and parachuting is a really horrible thing to tell your parents you're going to do beforehand. I just sent them an email. It's like the next day over on the other side of the world, and I'm like, hey, gotta run, about to jump out of an airplane. Really, really should have just told them afterwards, like, did this thing,
right.
Really fun,
yeah,
not something that you have to worry about. But they were like terrified for 12 hours. And that's just like a microcosm. I think that it's so hard for people who haven't come up in this industry to understand what it is. Drawing the analogy of business school is very, very smart. And then to just say, okay, yep, I jumped out of the airplane.
You're right. Yeah.
Don't worry about it. I'm on the ground.
Yeah.
Or at least I'm in free fall. So
there's
nothing you can do. And I paid for my own parachute. So
right. Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, it also still helped that like I was still in a graduate program at USC, like top film school in the country or whatever. So there was still a lot of many comforting factors for them.
Well, that's the other thing that I did wrong, which was, well, I didn't do it wrong, but certainly wrong from the perspective of comforting my family, was that I got into USC for that grad program and then for a variety of reasons chose not to go. And I may never hear the end of it, but hopefully I'm doing well enough now that
yes,
it's mostly obviated.
No
but
point.
So, all right, so you go to USC and you make this web series.
So I graduated from USC. I worked, while I was there, I concentrated on writing, directing, and editing. Those were the three things I was doing, with the idea that I would get out and I would work as an assistant editor and an editor, make my money while I'm doing my writing and directing on the side. And so I would introduce myself to people as a writer director. And they'd be like, oh, that's cool. So what have you made that I can watch? And I like nothing. I mean, I'm not going to show you my film school films because they're not that great. So I realized if I'm going to call myself a writer director, I have to make something that I can show people. And this is where the web series comes from. So I lived in Silver Lake at the time, and my husband is a cinematographer, right? We met at USC, and he's also a composer. And like we learned like all the trades at USC. So I knew between the two of us, we could make a web series very cheaply because he had a camera and some equipment. So this was like well within my means to make a web series. But for those of you who don't know, your biggest expense when you're making a low budget anything is sound, because you get, like, if you're getting a sound person for free, usually it'll just be really crappy. They just don't have the skills. And you have to pay anyone with actual skills, and it will be your biggest expense. So I couldn't pay for sound. I knew I couldn't afford that. So I designed my web series so that I wouldn't need any production sound. And the web series is about, it's called Hipsterhood, and it's about these two hipsters who keep seeing each other around the neighborhood, but never talk, because like you don't talk to like strangers in urban settings. But yeah, but the whole series is their inner dialogue of what they think about when they think about talking to each other. And so all the sound is basically done in post, like the sound design and the monologues and everything. And that was how I kept my costs really low, but made something good, I guess. And it was right when the whole idea and concept of the hipster was hitting the cultural zeitgeist. And so I released it right when everybody was interested in this idea of what is a hipster. And so it actually garnered a lot of attention for me. I worked really hard on the PR and marketing. Like, obviously I worked extremely hard on the writing, directing, editing. I did almost everything myself, right? My husband did the cinematography, the music, but I did everything else, including like getting lunch. Oftentimes it would be just me and my husband. Sometimes we had a PA on the shoot, and like that was it. Like, that's how small the whole thing was. But after the editing process was very, very difficult for me, because I was doing this format that I'd never really seen before, which is like almost all voiceover. And it was difficult to shoot because of that. And it was also difficult to edit, but I eventually figured it out. And then I was like, well, I have this content that I have made, and this is where most web series die, because the filmmakers don't know anything about PR and marketing. Right. And I was like, but I don't want to just put this up and nobody watch it. Like, I'm only halfway through, right? So you have to think about yourself as only being halfway there. So then I taught myself enough marketing and PR to actually kind of get some people to see it. And then that kind of snowballed, because again, it was hitting the zeitgeist at the right moment. So I got some good PR. Like, we had an article in Huffington Post, that one I had placed. We got picked up by the print edition of USA Today somehow.
And how did you, well, so you say somehow, but in the interest of being instructive, how did you pursue these things? How did you, what were you doing to get it noticed?
There's like two general things you can do. One, you write a press release, which just Google press releases, a bunch will come up. You'll figure out what format you need. And there are a couple of portals that are like, you can pay or they're free, but it just puts it out into some kind of like general media place where anybody can look at your press release. The other thing I did, the thing that took all the time, was you scour the internet for any websites, and I'm talking like anything from the New York Times to like the random like guy in Utah who has a web series blog, who has like 5 readers, right? And you find any website that you think would be interested in either you or your content. And you basically research them, you figure out who you need to talk to there. Again, more just searching the internet for information. And then you write them like a query letter, basically saying, I think you'll be interested in me or my content for these reasons. And you do this when you have any kind of materials, like a teaser trailer or a poster or whatever, clips. Right. Send them, examples of something. Obviously make it very short and sweet. And then you wait for them to get back to you. And only it's a very small amount, like 3 or 5 or 10% of people will get back to you. And then you basically coordinate with them about how, what is it that you're asking for? Is it an interview? Is it a collab video, whatever it is, you know, you work with them. Hopefully, like the best way to do it is you already have a release date in mind. So you already know when you're going to release it. And so you can schedule how this kind of what PR thing like gets on the internet, and then you orchestrate it all for your release day and move forward. And so it's just a lot of time of like scouring the internet, trying to find people that you think will be interested, and then trying to get them to you know, reach back out to you. So having done all that, I placed the Huffington Post article myself. I knew somebody who knew somebody at Huffington Post. The USA Today article, I assume they found the press release and somehow picked it up that way, because we definitely, like, why would I reach out to USA Today? I don't know. We were picked up by the local news. This also, I assume, was a press release, because, and they did a segment on us at like the lunchtime local news. It was NBC LA, where they played a clip of the show. It was really cool. And then like a couple other, I can't even remember what the sites are anymore. But what happened was, like, very much like a film festival, it snowballs, right? So like once you get like one or two things, people start copying that. And then like the other websites on the internet that need content, right? They find your work because somebody else has written about it, and then they contact you, or they just like copy and paste what they've already seen. And so I was able to kind of get a lot of views that way, which is not the typical way a web series gets popular. Usually it's more of a slow roll. But I happened, because I was able to coordinate all this media and PR on my like release date, I had more of like a launch, I think, a traditional launch.
Right. Well, it's interesting because Tasha and I have been talking about how to market this interview series. You are the last of our first week of, well, really our last of our beta interviews, which I've defined for our viewers as people who I feel comfortable enough with that I can screw up in front of them and not feel horrible. But it's interesting to think about. We'll have to do some of these things to promote this series, and it's really smart, because you say most web series have more of a gradual rollout and blah blah blah. That's not true. Most web series just don't get seen, and so the fact that you did all of these things to make sure that it was seen and that you had a good product to show is that's the combination that you need. I always say the number one predictor of success is that you have a great piece of material and get it in front of somebody with the ability to hire you to replicate it or to do the next version of it or whatever it is. And so a full-on PR assault is a pretty good way to do that.
Yeah. And I was really hoping, you know, what you said would happen, which is I get it in front of the right people, and then somebody hires me for something, because that is the whole goal of web series, really, or at least the career goal of a web series.
Nobody's making money off the web series directly.
Right. Exactly.
It's setting them up. It's a calling card.
Right. But
and just before we move on from that, do you think that PR strategy would also work for you know, somebody who's made a short, an indie film? It certainly seems to me like it might. People coming at this with other products that might be in their back pockets.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, definitely. You have to look at your content and target your audience, basically. So like, I don't even know who I thought my audience was, but you know, if you've made a short film about like disabled homosexual people, then I don't know why I just picked those two. But
it's an audience.
Yeah, then you would target, you know, websites or bloggers or you know, YouTubers, whoever, who cater to those audiences, right? Because they would be interested in your content. So like the PR kind of, it's really about targeting your audience. That's really what you're doing. So if you have if you have a really specific audience, regardless of what your content actually is, whether it's a short film or an indie feature or whatever, target your audience, because they will watch it. But it's harder if your audience is like hard to define. If it's just like women, you know, or people who like to laugh, you know, you need to be able to define it and really go after it that way.
But that's smart in terms of that's a smart thing to think about in terms of what you go out and write. And that's not just for a web series, that's for any kind of series. I was having a conversation recently with someone who uh, is watching the show that I spent the last year and a half working on, Hunters, for Amazon. And
Mhm.
she was saying there's a lot of really like Jewish shows out now. But I had just had a conversation a couple days before that with a friend who's African American saying, you know what? There's a lot of African American shows out now. And the the upshot of it all is that the model for TV 20 years ago was there's only going to be 4 networks or whatever it is, and you want to
Right.
get the biggest share of that pie between the four.
Mhm.
Now there's infinite stuff, and so you need an audience that's really built in. And so like, well, at least we know that Jewish people are going to watch. At least we know that African Americans are going to watch. You need something, and it doesn't necessarily have to be an ethnic group or religion either. It can also be a topic, as you had,
Mhm.
hipsterdom and what modern life and relationships are,
Mhm.
uh, that taps the zeitgeist, but something that makes people go, "Oh yeah, okay, I'm the audience for that. That's for me."
Yeah.
Uh, so that's a very smart way to get your stuff out there. Everybody listening, take notes. Uh, and you have this big launch. Then what happens?
And then I had, I got a lot of views, and I had some
Are you at
people.
liberty to say how many views?
Oh
Just
God,
out
I
of
don't remember.
curiosity.
I don't. I mean, it's also over time and
Sure.
whatever. I mean, it does not compare to anything now, right? Like now, I think I got like 2,000 views on the first day on my first episode, like in the first 24-hour period, which was much more than I thought what I would get, you know. So that was nice, because I think most people, like, if you don't really do much for your web series and you premiere it in the first day, if you're nobody, you get like maybe 200, right?
Sure.
So that was cool. But basically what happened was like,
And
yeah,
that was also, well, I was just going to say that was a few years back at a
yeah,
time when 2,000 views in a day. Now, everything
right.
gets 2,000 views or more things get 2,000 views. I don't remember, or I don't know exactly what time frame we're talking here, but
I
yeah.
think it was 2012 or
Okay.
2012, I think that was, or 2013, like something in there. Um, but I mean, in general, what happened was like, it was, deemed a success, like by all kind of indicators that you would look at for a web series at that time. It was successful and people were watching it. And I was like, here comes my agent and manager. That did not happen. They didn't care.
Hmm.
But I did kind of meet some people, and they were all like, oh, this is great. So what are you going to do next? And I was like, well, I was hoping somebody would give me a job.
Hmm.
And nobody offered me anything. Nobody, I mean, there wasn't even like, come edit for my whatever. I was like, none of that was happening. So I was like, oh my God, I have to do this again, like in some way, shape, or form. I have to, again, just create my own content from scratch and get it out there. That's the only thing people seem to care about.
Right.
So I ended up doing a season 2. And this time I had to crowdfund it, basically. And just, there's like a lot of twists and turns in the story. So I'm just going to kind of cut to the chase, which is I did a season 2, and it did fairly well. And this time it caught the attention of, actually it didn't catch the attention, but it had been financed by a company called Blip. Blip is no longer around, but they had actually given me money to make it because they were like a web series company. And at the time, some people were paying for web series. So I actually paid myself to make it, which I would say I am one of the few web series creators who profited off a web series.
It's good.
But that company Blip was bought by Maker Studios, if you remember Maker Studios, another internet
Yeah.
influencer center company.
Sure.
Maker Studios was bought by ABC Disney. And so what happened was, through a very like random coincidence where I ran into the president of ABC Digital, not knowing that I was going to meet him, I met him at an event and told him that I think that his company holds the license to my web content. And actually working with ABC Digital, which was a department at ABC back then, as a development consultant for their web content, because they were creating an app that would have a lot of streaming content on it. They have been doing this for a very long time.
Yeah. Did that app ever come out?
No, I mean, it turned into the app that they have now, Disney Plus, but it's like, it's had many, many different shapes and forms. And
Interesting. Okay.
yeah,
Because
so,
I've always in the back of my head been like, oh yeah, Disney's going to be coming out with like a web series channel, which of course that makes sense. Now a web series just happens to be The Mandalorian.
exactly. So while I was like a development consultant for them, and they would like kind of pitch me ideas that I would then try to develop out. That never went anywhere. But I also was able to pitch them my own ideas that I could retain the IP to, and see if they would want to make any of those. So I pitched them. I had started working on a new web series that would eventually become Brown Girls, a TV show. So I pitched them Brown Girls, the web series, as for them to make, and they really liked it, but it wasn't what they wanted to do with their platform. And they had told me, Shilpi, we're ABC Disney, like if you have a project that you think works better at a different part of this company, let us know and we can try to help you kind of get to them. So I was like, I think this web series would actually make a really good TV show for ABC Family. It was still ABC Family at the time. Could you help me like get to them? Because you have to remember, I don't have an agent or manager or anything yet, right? I still have no representation.
Right.
So they were like, sure, we can do that. So they actually reached out to the ABC Family people and set up a pitch for me. And that's how I walked into ABC Family with no representation. I had no script. I had no producers. All I literally had was the pitch, no visuals even. I just had my verbal pitch. And I walked in and I pitched it to them. And Brown Girls is about it was like Perfect Strangers, but two Indian girls, like one, again, like me, Indian American, and one who was from India, who had just recently come to the US. And so it was basically Perfect Strangers, but with two Indian women. And luckily, one of the execs I was pitching to was an Indian American woman. So who happened to be on board with the whole thing. So I ended up, she had no idea who I was, no clue. She was like, we don't even know who set up this pitch. Like this is, we know it's like somewhere from within ABC, but we don't really know how any of this has happened. But she liked the idea enough that she wanted to move forward with it. So she had me meet with a non-writing producer to kind of come on board, this woman named Tracy Katsky. And once Tracy came on board, ABC Family said they would buy it. At this point, they had turned into Freeform. So it was like the week after I pitched, they turned into Freeform. And I was like, are you the same network? Like, I don't even know what that means. But they still wanted the idea, so that's good. So that is how I sold my first show in a very, very odd way.
Yeah, I'm just thinking the takeaway is not so much like try and get those exact things into alignment, but to just keep putting out content and marketing it and throwing the ball against the wall until you find somebody on the other side who clicks with it.
Yeah, and you have to be ready to take advantage of an opportunity when it comes your way. So yeah. Luckily I had, as I had been developing this new web series, I realized it was more complex than just a web series. It felt like it could be a TV show. And so like, I was like, well, I should pursue that. They told me they can help me get a TV pitch, so I should ask them about it. Just being, what is the word? Taking initiative, having initiative.
Yeah, and taking the swing.
Yeah.
That might not be available later.
Exactly. And by the way, when I asked like for a pitch to be set up, I don't know if that means like next week or in 2 months. And I did not have like my TV pitch ready. Like I knew I would have to change some things. I didn't really know what. I still didn't know very much about TV. I just knew it should probably be a little longer. Or like I should work in like more complex situations or something. So I was like, if this thing is going to be like next week, I'm kind of screwed but I have to, but then it's like, it's pitch practice, right? Like at the very least, I get to practice pitching. And, I had
Sure.
no real expectation of it selling because again, I was a nobody. But it turned out the pitch was set up for, I want to say like 2 months after I reached out about it. So it got like moved. I think it was like 1 month and then it got moved to like 2 months or something. But it gave me enough time to like actually work on the pitch and make it good. So that was helpful.
Wow. And yeah, seizing the day. You seize the day now so that you can have that day 2 months from now.
Yes.
Now, once you get that green light, tell me about the process from there, because I have heard tell of what that experience was like, and what it's been like for you and for others once you have a pilot that's a going concern.
Yeah. You mean the green light to write the pilot or make it?
Both.
Both. Okay, so again, everybody's experience is different. Me being somebody who, again, came out of nowhere, they said that they would only essentially do this if we brought on a co-writing showrunner. So at first I was kind of very upset about this because it's like, oh, they don't trust me. And my producer was like, look, this is just how TV is. They don't trust anybody. So it's not like it's not personal really. Although it kind of is a little bit, but.
Well, it's just so much money.
Yeah, it's a lot of money on the table. But at that time, everything I was hearing in social media, in the industry, everywhere is like, more women. We need more women of color and more women to like do these things, like write shows and direct shows and create them. And so I was like, here, I'm right here. I literally just sold you a show and now you want to put me with somebody else. Like the messaging, it's like mixed messaging, right? So
Sure.
What I told my producer was like, okay, fine. If this is what's going to happen, can I please get a woman of color as my co-writing showrunner? And everyone basically just laughed at me and was like, listen, there are like 2 of those. This is I want to say 2015. And when I sold it, and they're like, so listen.
Funny, I know it was 2015 because I remember where I was when I heard it, and I know who I was working for. And so I'm going, when was I working for that guy? Oh yeah, that's when it was.
So so they all laughed at me, and I was like, well, look, I was like, all the messaging I'm hearing is like, we need more women, or we need women of color, and I have, like, if nobody else is gonna bring it up, I'm gonna bring it up. So I met with, this is where my non-writing producer really came in handy, because if it would just been the network who was looking for a showrunner for me, they would have just picked whoever they like. And they're not really looking for a relationship. But my producer was like, we're going to find you the right person, somebody who like is going to be great to work with because you're a first time everything. So I met with a few different like old white men who are, wonderful people and great writers. But I finally met with this woman named Nasrin Dubai, who is Iranian American. And she like very much, she got the idea immediately. Right. And just the whole kind of immigrant angle and women of color and everything. She was a woman of color. And so I paired up with her. And then we wrote it together. It was a wonderful experience. I was very fortunate that it was a wonderful experience because I've heard many stories of where this type of situation is not a wonderful experience for kind of the junior writer. But Nasrin was really great. And the way it worked essentially for writing the pilot was I wrote the first draft of everything so that she could kind of see what I was trying to accomplish. And then she would go in and kind of do her rewrites and edits and then send it to me. And then we would just kind of work back and forth like that until we had something we both liked. And so that is essentially how the pilot writing process went. Also, when Nasrin came on board, Tracy Katsky works with Aaron Kaplan of Capital Entertainment. And so Nasrin used to be Aaron's client when he was an agent and also when he was a manager. And now he's a producer. And so Aaron came on board as a producer. So, and Aaron is like a powerhouse in the industry. So I got to know him, which was really cool. But basically what happened was we wrote the pilot. It was wonderful. And I had sold it as a single camera show, and we wrote it as a single camera show. But it did get greenlit for an actual pilot production, but it got greenlit for a multicam pilot.
How did that happen?
And I mean, to this day, I still don't know exactly what happened. All I know is like Freeform felt that's what they wanted. They would rather it be multicam. We're not really sure why. I can guess. I mean, one of the things is I think they were trying to pair it with a multicam comedy that was already on their network. So it'd be part of like an hour block of multicams. Multicams are generally cheaper. And truth be told, it was written in such a way that it could be converted to multicam. So, and that was something. What?
Intentionally?
No,
Did you
no.
intentionally keep those options open, or was it just that, oh, well, it could be?
No, in fact, we actually said, like Nastrin told me, she was like, in the very beginning, she was like, we got to make sure we write this really single cam so that they don't flip it to multicam.
Huh.
And I was like, wait, is that something they can do? And everyone was like, oh yeah, they can totally do that. And I was like, that would be like my worst nightmare. I think I literally said that out loud. But just in the writing, I mean, look, even single cam shows have limited locations, right? I mean, you can't just write like and it's a pilot, like you can only show so many things in the pilot. So at the end of the day, it wasn't written in such a way that like it couldn't be a multicam. So anyway, we had to convert it to a multicam. So honestly, rewriting it as multicam was not really that hard. And we did it. And then, we got greenlit to go into production. So then we produced a multicam pilot.
And what was that like, having the live audience and all that?
That was also like, again, it was also a wonderful experience. Like I don't really have any horror stories about anything because everyone was great. Aaron Kaplan, like he is a great producer. Like he is a very successful producer for a reason. Like he knows how to convince networks like to do what the writers want to do, and so anytime we actually had a problem, like he would get on the phone and like make things happen. But we didn't really ever have problems because again, everybody was great. Everybody was on the same team. They're all on the same team. The worst thing that happened was I found out the show was about two Indian women. I was kind of the only Indian woman in production. Nobody else was Indian. In fact, when we first found out we were greenlit to produce the pilot, me and the other EPs had a meeting about, who are we going to hire, like DP, production designer, whatever. And Aaron, I remember, had brought like this thick pile of just like people that he's worked with. And Nastrin was there, and it became very clear to me that like every name that was being kind of thrown out there as a possibility was probably a white man. Like that was just the feeling that I was getting. And I was like, this is a show about two young Indian women. And again, I really want to bring up the whole women and women of color thing, but I'm feeling very intimidated because I am the youngest and most inexperienced person in the room. And
yet it's your baby.
And yet it's my baby. So I'm in this very weird position, right? And luckily, Mark Sandrowski was the director, the Big Bang Theory guy. And he had brought up, he was like, because this show is like two young Indian women, I think it's a good idea to have a female AD. And he was on the phone, he wasn't even in the room. And I was like, oh my God, thank God somebody's brought it up. And I piggybacked on him and I was like, yes, in fact, could we consider women and people of color for all the other positions as well? And I saw immediately every single person in the room went, oh, yeah, let's do that. And like the conversation totally changed. And they really started thinking about it.
Right.
And it's
sometimes it just takes a little bit of that push of like, we could do some not white people.
Right.
And you go, oh, we could do some women. Oh, interesting. There was a project I was working on where there was somebody who was supposed to be a religious figure. And I just thought, I was like, what if it was an imam? and like you could just see people like, what? That's crazy. And then it didn't end up going to series anyway, but
Right.
he was in the draft.
There you go. So so we worked hard on that, but the reality is multicam, is a very specific craft. There aren't a lot of people of color who work in multicam. So it wasn't necessarily as diverse as I'd like. And it turns out I was the only Indian woman on the show about these two other Indian women, except we did hire one PA that was an Indian woman who's also a filmmaker. And I found out sometime like later on that like a lot of the crew people would go to her for like Indian related things that they like didn't want to bother me about. And I was like, well, they obviously, and sometimes they would come to me just depending on what it was. But I guess for like the things that seemed of lesser importance, for instance, what Indian music should we play as the audience is coming in, like that kind of thing. They didn't want to bother me with that question, right? So like they went to her or something like that. So
Yeah.
that was like the weirdest. Huh?
Were the cast members Indian American?
Yeah. So we cast, yes, the roles that were for Indian Americans were cast as Indian American. That was also, I guess, it worked out in the end, but a lot of times, like when you have people come in for auditions, you don't necessarily know if they are Indian or not. Right. So of all the people coming, like I was most educated, like I could tell either by their look or their name if they were or weren't. And then there were times when people were like, oh my God, they were so great. And I'd be like, yeah, so listen, they're actually Egyptian. They'd be like, well, that's close, right? I'm like, that's not close. That's not gonna work. It's a very specific set of countries that these people can be from. And then there were a few people who came in who I wasn't sure myself if they were or not. And I would like spend hours Googling at times because you also kind of can't ask them, or I don't quite know what the situation is in casting, but like no one seemed like they wanted to just outright ask the question, are you South Asian? So we kind of went about it in different ways. But those were like really, again, none of those were major issues or anything at all. Just things that you deal with, in any pilot, you'll deal with that stuff. So it went, really well. The live audience was amazing. What I was told was that normally pilot shoots with audiences, the audiences usually fall flat because like they don't know the characters, they don't really know the humor of the show yet. So they don't usually go very well. Our audience was laughing from scene one. Like they totally were completely into it, invested in the characters. We had a lot of veteran kind of punch-up writers on set. They were all like, you guys, this is an amazing show. Congratulations. Shilpi, this is like your first thing and it's going to get on the air. This is amazing. Like, just everybody's patting themselves on the back.
Mm-hmm.
It's going. And then it died.
What happened? How'd it die?
Again, not exactly sure how it died. By now it's 2017, I believe. And it just—
So 2 years have passed now.
Yeah. And it got mixed results in testing. That's what I was told. We weren't really a part of testing. The network did the testing, so I don't really know. Mm-hmm. And then the head of the network wasn't, super keen on it. So it just didn't move forward. But the network was still they still loved the idea a lot. They were very much behind it. So they actually asked us to come in and redevelop it. So then we went through a redevelopment of the pilot. But right as we started the redevelopment, the network exec who was championing the project left. She left the network. And so, another thing I learned about TV, it's like when your exec leaves, their projects die. And so, yeah. So we did the redevelopment, but it was very clear early on that like it wasn't going to move out of the script phase. So, that was that.
And so that almost brings us up to the present day, that you have this, like it's everything's exploding, everything's happening. It's so exciting, and then it stops.
Mm-hmm.
And then what does the world look like for you after that?
And then you're like, I need another job because I need money. And
Right.
so right as that was happening, right when I realized that like the second pilot was not going to go anywhere, and now I'm essentially unemployed again. Um, my friend, in almost exactly the same way that I did, sold a show, and she sold it to Netflix, where it's this Team Kaylee Netflix show, and they did it. They went
Right.
straight to space, and I had actually I had kind of helped her develop it from the very like from the logline stage. So I kind of been with her kind of in her whole process and helped her as much as I can. And so she actually got me a staff writing job on the show. So like, you know, you just kind of keep hustling, and like eventually you know the right people and things will happen.
And be friends with talented people. Like,
Yeah.
don't be friends with hacks. It's much better to be friends with talented people who you know are going places, so that eventually they can hire you onto their shows.
Yes, but I will say there are a number of hacks who are probably successful and working, and can also hire you if you're nice enough to them.
Right. So either be friends with really talented people or really well-connected hacks.
Yes, yes, I think that
Yeah.
works. Good advice.
That's one of the best takeaways I think that one could possibly have.
Yeah.
But so that's a really interesting arc, going from uh, starting getting your toe into development, making your own things. I think that that's something that a lot of people really need that push to do, is to make your own thing, but then to only look at it as half done when the project is complete in terms of the filmmaking, and then the other half of it is the marketing and the pushing it, because there's a straight line from that PR push that you did for yourself on your own behalf to you having a pilot that gets ordered and produced and all that stuff, because then that leads to uh, a company that's acquired by Disney buying your second season, and then getting you into the room with Disney, and then they make your pilot, and uh, it all roots back to really advocating for yourself before there was anybody to advocate for you.
Yep, absolutely.
It's also awesome too, you're an Indian American woman, but it's certainly possible you could have gone and written a show about like some white dude that solves crimes. Like you wanted to stay authentic and organic to the story that you wanted to tell.
Yeah, and that's kind of back to your thought about like find an audience, like find your niche audience. It works on the other side too, which is like how many white men can pitch an authentic story about an Indian woman, you know?
I mean, I
Like
sure could. I feel confident about that. I'm a white guy. I know stuff, right?
Yes, yes, that's true. But fortunately, like this is right when all of that kind of thinking was coming to the surface, and
Mm,
people were starting to question, like, maybe we shouldn't just let random white guys pitch stories about things that they don't really know that much about. Maybe we should look for the source. And so, like that was in the zeitgeist, and I was like, well, I am a source. I have like a lot of legitimacy in a way that other white men wouldn't if they were trying to pitch this show. And so I stuck very squarely in the like, I'm an Indian woman, I know about Indian women. That was also one of the things when I was selling Brown Girls. I had people tell me like, well, they might just fire you, like they might just pay you for the idea and not let you work on it.
right.
And I was
That does
like,
happen.
which does happen. And I was like, how many Indian women are like TV writers are they going to be able to find to come in to replace me? Like you have to have somebody, you can have at least one person who knows what they're talking about.
There's that
So
PA.
well, yeah, it could have, yes, but at that point, I'm like, it was me or the PA, so like I'm
Right.
there already,
I'm
it's
being
already.
facetious, of course.
So so it was a little bit of job security as well so at this point, I've still only successfully pitched stuff that is about Indian women. but I've also only pitched stuff about Indian women. So now it's like, can I go out and pitch something about a white guy and they'll buy it?
I mean, if you need somebody with extensive expertise in that experience
Yeah.
of being a white guy, I am sitting here with a Metallica shirt. It's pretty white. So I'm happy to be a font of information for you for that.
I will put you down as an expert on my roster of experts on things. You know, you white guy expert.
Cool.
The Metallica really sells it.
Thank you. It's actually it's mostly Latino guys at those shows, but also some really, really nerdy white guys.
Okay, good to
know. But yeah, are there any parting thoughts that you have that you would want to share? I think you've really forged your own path and your own voice, and something that's very authentic and specific. Are there any other thoughts that you would want to bestow upon an audience?
I mean, my general thought that I like to tell people is, don't be afraid to take risks, as long as you're willing to work really, really hard for them. Like, so don't be stupid. Don't be stupid about it. Like, don't be like, I'm gonna quit my job and wait for someone to call me. Like, that's not gonna work. But like, I actually quit my job, or no, I was I was laid off, and then I also quit my job. I can't remember the sequence of events at some point, but at some point I actually quit my job to work on my web series stuff, because my job was just so soul sucking. And again, it paid off for me, but I did all the work, right? I didn't just quit my job and then sit around and like, you know, slack off.
Sure.
So, but I always advocate, like, people are always so afraid of, you know, giving up their daily income or changing their path in life, right? Because everybody thinks like, oh, if I just do this, this, and this, I'll be successful. And like, as we all know, that's just not how it works in the industry. There is no straight line anywhere. So if you feel like you want a change, then make it happen.
And when you quit your job, you were married. Your husband was still working.
I was married, and my husband's a cinematographer, and quite frankly, his income is not steady. Like,
right.
It's not reliable. Let's put it that way.
It's not like you married somebody who works at Procter and Gamble.
Right, exactly. I was able to quit my job and still get some unemployment, which was obviously helpful. But I mean, even without that, I think I would have still done it. I was like emotionally at a place where I just couldn't be there anymore, even though it was like the easiest job in the world. Sure. I just couldn't do it because it was so soul sucking, and like really, and everybody told me not to do it. Everybody was like, why would you? Even my husband, they're like, why would you quit your job without having another one lined up? And I was looking for a job. I didn't want to just not work. I just want to get a better job. And I was like, look, I've been trying. I can't find anything. I cannot be here any longer. I just can't do it. And so I quit my job, and really and then I was like, I don't have a job. Oh my God, I have to do something. So once I realized I could get unemployment, I decided I was just going to work really hard on my web series and make
it your job.
Yeah. And do that for like as long as I could. And then like when I needed, you know, when we were out of money, I would find something. But yeah, I made the web series my job for a good 6 months, like a solid 6 months.
Well, that circles back actually very neatly to where this story begins, really, which is you telling your parents that you're applying to business school for film. And it's a piece of advice that I've given to a lot of people, which is, when you set out to make a career as a writer or a director or a creative, what you're doing is you're saying, I'm creating a small business, and my product is my writing, and my directing is my creative output. But you're starting that small business, and you have to think of yourself as a small business. And if you're a small business person and you're opening up a restaurant on the corner, well, what do you have to do? You're going to have to create product. Like, you're going to have to, create the dishes and figure out what's your signature dish that's going to get people in the door. You're going to have to market that product. You're going to have to flyer all the neighborhood places to say, hey, come try my restaurant. Eventually, you can do the beginning with just like yourself and a spouse or a friend or whatever, but then you're going to need to get a staff,
Mhm.
which is what an agent and a manager is. And when you think of it in that framework, all of a sudden, so much else in this industry starts to make sense,
Yeah.
because it's like, oh, it is just like starting almost any other small business.
Yeah.
Um,
You're basically an entrepreneur slash
yes,
small business owner,
yeah,
and you should operate that way.
yeah. And your story, I think, illustrates that particularly keenly, because you did all the small business person things. You
I
made your
did.
own product, and then you marketed it, and then you got somebody else to pay you to contract you for the next gig.
I am a small person of business.
Cool. Well, I think that you are a small person of business who is on the way to very big business. And
I like how I pulled that one out.
thank you, thank you. I just hope to be around, your orbit when it happens, because uh, it'll be it'll be quite awesome to see.
Well, I will always have space for white guys who like Metallica.
Categorically, I don't know if that's wise, but for me, I'll take it.
Okay. All right. I will
Thank
talk
you so
to
much,
you
Shilpi.
later, Joel. Thanks everybody who has watched.
Thank you.
Bye. Good night.
Bye. Good night.